this is the situation we're facing today. The same can be said about the Council, and the same can be said about the government. Thank you.
Mr.
Leung Yu-chung. At the MPA, the ground floor, second, third floors belong to the MPA, and it is lying outside Hong Kong and lying within the mainland. The government said that this will be leased to the mainland. The legislation or the bill doesn't say anything about the lease. Would there be any duration of the lease? No tenure. Without any tenure, it's going to be there in perpetuity. Will Hong Kong be losing the jurisdiction there in perpetuity? The government doesn't say. Many members said that this is not in order because we can't see why the government doesn't provide for a sunset clause in the bill. Regarding the tenure, the government said there is no need for a sunset clause because they cannot see any expiry date, because this XRL is a long-term cross-boundary infrastructural project. It's going to be standing Hong Kong's economic development in good stead, and this is filling us with misgivings. This is a place that belongs to Hong Kong, even the UK. In old days, it was enjoy immense power. There was tenure for the lease. Why is it there is no lease tenure here? I mean, we are really exasperated about it. We proposed that there should be an expiry date, and I subscribe to these ideas myself. In December 2017, the NPCSC acknowledged the cooperation arrangement. After this acknowledgement, the Bar Association made the statement that the NPCSC's decision was really shocking. The reason being that the NPCSC's decision merely pointed out that the NPCSC approved the cooperation arrangement and that the arrangement was in line with the Constitution and the Basic Law. It doesn't advance any legal backing. The NPCSC also pointed out that the SAR government should legislate to protect and to implement the cooperation arrangement. This is unprecedented, and this is showing us that it is really undermining the one country, two systems. The NPCSC Secretary, Mr. Li Fei, said that the NPCSC has taken the decision, and the decision enjoys constitutional status. It is the highest form of decision. It cannot be challenged. The decision of NPCSC is regarded as law. Does the NPCSC have the legislative power? The government failed to give any explanation. The Bar Association said that the NPCSC cannot exercise the power in vacuum. In connection with Hong Kong affairs, they cannot take. They can only take any decision in accordance with the national constitution and the Basic Law. The NPCSC decision obviously is inconsistent with many provisions in the Basic Law, and they fail to give any legal justification. BL 11 says that no law enacted by the Legislative Council shall contravene the Basic Law. So it is very clear the NPCSC's decision should not become the point of reference for enactment of legislation in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong legislature cannot endorse or enact any legislation inconsistent with the Basic Law. BL 18 provides the national laws shall not be applied in the Hong Kong SAR except those listed in Annex 3, with exception of foreign affairs and other matters. As the government admitted that BL-18, the legislative intent is to prevent national laws from being applied to the entirety of Hong Kong in order that the high degree of autonomy and the legal system will be compromised. But the government said that the co-location arrangement is not against the basic law because the national laws will only be applicable to the MPA. And those who choose to enter into the MPA will only be affected. President, this simply doesn't hold water. BL-18 is very clear in terms of legislative intent. It prevents national laws from being applied to everybody in Hong Kong, but the government insists that passengers can choose whether to go into the MPA. Now, this strikes people as trying to concoct a reason to justify themselves. It is against the spirit of the law. If they don't follow the legislative procedures and whether the mainland laws are applicable to the MPA or Hong Kong, it is blatantly against BL-18.
There's only jurisdiction issue. Except when reserved matters, the Hong Kong courts will not be applicable to any MPA, and the mainland laws courts will have the jurisdiction of the matters in the MPA. The government claims there are existing provisions to restrict the jurisdiction of the court in Hong Kong, for example, on international organizations and privileges. Let's say there shouldn't be any direct comparison, that the government seems to be twisting its argument. So by way of local legislation, does that mean that we can exclude any part of Hong Kong from the court jurisdiction? Once we have this precedent, will fundamentally and substantively undermine the credibility of the basic law. Another issue being that the international conventions enforced in Hong Kong but not in mainland, well, will they be applicable in the MPA? For example, the ICCPR, to ensure that the public had the right to a peaceful assembly and to fair trial. If any members of the public assembled in the MPA, then will the mainland authority personnel able to make arrests? Will they bring them to mainland for trial? How would this issue be resolved? The administration explained that the international conventions, whether applicable to the MPA, will depend on the facts of the case and other relevant factors. And Chairman, listen to this. So this is as good as telling you nothing, not explanation. So what are the relevant factors? The central government claims that PRC as the sovereign, or as the Hong Kong, will ensure that the obligations under the international convention will be properly discharged. However, I've yet to explain that and for the basic rights, and how will they afford the same legal protection under mainland courts? If that could not be explained in transferring the Hong Kong court jurisdiction to mainland, what are the legal rationale and what kind of protection the Hong Kong public still have? So does that you are depriving the legal protection as afforded under the basic law in international convention of highway passengers. At this stage, the government have yet to offer a convincing explanation. Is keep on distorting the argument and claims that for the legal policy officer, and the administration claims that the central government has the duty to ensure that Hong Kong will not violate any international conventions and tell us not to worry. So by merely telling you not to worry, would that be stop worrying? This is simply unconvincing. Another things more outrageous is that for the saying that the MPA is of limited size, so that the likelihood of having major issues will be quite low. Well, what if something did really happened and we claim to negotiate with the central government in deciding on the best and appropriate approach? Wouldn't be this be laughable? And in claiming this size of the MPA being small should not be a problem. So if a thief commit a theft, stole money but in a small amount, does that mean that he didn't break the law? So this line of logic is simply horrifying. The crux of the matter being, it's not a matter of the size of the MPA, it's a matter of whether our human rights are protected. That this current approach will violate the basic protectionist and the spirit of the conventions. The administration claims that the passengers can free to decide whether to take the XRL or not, and it claims that it will actually bring social benefits and therefore will strike a balance. So we can actually strike a trade-off of human rights and social benefits. So while we're fighting for basic human rights protection, and yet it was claimed that due to social benefits that it could be taken away. So even for the backward countries, they wouldn't dare say something like this, and yet the Hong Kong government would have the thick skin to say this, which I found to be outrageous. So if the human rights can be traded off as social benefits, that will be the most ludicrous. If someone chose to forego their basic rights in return for taking on the XRL, how could this even be tolerated? How could the government allow this to happen and sacrifice the human rights protection? And the government papers point out that the human rights is a universal value, and the convention cannot be annulled upon ratification. Therefore, the Human Rights Bill of Rights must be applicable to entire Hong Kong, including the MPA. Otherwise, it would violate the rights under the convention. So the amendment by Dr. KWOK stipulated that the Hong Kong Bill of Rights will continue to be applicable in the MPA and will be enforceable against the mainland station authorities personnel if they're unreasonable on the custody of and wouldn't allow to apply habeas corpus. Then, but through the Bill of Rights mechanism, they can launch legal action. I support this. Besides protecting human rights, at an international law level, there will also preclude the likelihood of the co-location arrangement in violation of the basic law. Otherwise, the central government will have to make account to the United Nations, which would lead to the embarrassment on the central government. In any case, I hope you can support the Dr. KWOK's amendment. Besides the co-location arrangements, it also led to a host of problems, and the government have yet to account for them. So some colleagues have asked about the details of the leasing agreement or the construction drawings of the West Kowloon Station. The government have yet to provide them, and it claims that the XLL is jointly operated by both sides, and thus an operation agreement must be signed by both sides. However, yet to be implemented, and have not divulged any details. Since we have so many doubts surrounding it, and has in contravention of the basic law, and yet the amendment bill has not conducted public consultation. Therefore, we want to support this, and not for the sake of convenience and speed and economic benefits. that would sacrifice our rule of law and human rights and such important values to be undermined and not worth the cost. Well, I hope that the other colleagues can think carefully and not accept the co-location bill. Mr. Kerry Fan, I would like to call for quorum.
We have now a quorum. Meeting resumes. Mr. Alvin Young. On the 4th of June this year, the President made a ruling to allow some members to move amendments to the co-location bill. At the same time, he ruled out of order some amendments. The amendments allowed are the one you see today at the Council. This time round, the pro-establishment camp never moved a single amendment. The pan-democratic camp moved a total of 75 amendments, but only 24 were allowed, and 51 were not allowed. So you can see it's the minority of the amendments that's been allowed. Most of the amendments have been ruled out. But then, apart from moving amendments of substance and also textual amendments, other than that, all the amendments make good sense, and so we don't understand why the President would rule them out. Since the second reading debate of the bill, many members have discussed similar issues here. The same question here, and the President every time said that his ruling could not be debated, and that's against the spirit of freedom of consideration of business in this Council. So I want to put this on record. We want the future generation to see what sort of a dictator our President is. Now, in short, we observe that the President is abusing powers. Now, he alone makes the rule. Of course, he doesn't make rulings on his own. He listens to the advice of the legal advisors and the Secretary for Justice too. But then he just decided to remove these amendments, so we don't get a chance to debate these amendments. So is that not against the principle of democratic and free consideration of business? Now, for some amendments, is it the case that it's for the President to decide whether they allow? Well, we doubt that, because if we talk about democratic spirit, then the President should adopt an open mind in considering all the amendments, so these amendments could be debated and considered in this chamber. It should not be for the President alone to make the decision. Let's look at the logic of the President's ruling. On the 4th of June, it said that the bill is to put in place a cooperation arrangement as a result of the MPCSC decision. So anything that is outside the cooperation arrangement or the MPCS decision is outside the scope of the bill. That's what the President said. Well, perhaps some don't see a problem with that. If it's a departure from the cooperation arrangement, of course, it's outside the scope of the bill. Of course, it cannot be moved. But what about the cooperation arrangement, which is actually passed by the MPCSC, and Hong Kong people have no say in it whatsoever? So that means it's something totally not related to any members here, because this is a decision made by the CPG. All we need to do is to press the button to vote in favor of the bill. Is that the logic of the President? So we need to ask this, Madam Deputy. Do we need to follow fully the entire cooperation arrangement, or rather we need to ask the question as to why we need to follow fully the cooperation arrangement? Some amendments moved by a few democratic members are about for mainland laws that apply to the MPA, it will be limited to those related to the CIQ clearance procedures. So it's not about applying all mainland laws to Hong Kong. So, even laws of undermining national safety would also apply here at the West Kowloon Station. But then the President saying that this amendments are outside the scope of the bill, so that's why they're not allowed. But why is it that in Hong Kong we have one country, two systems? More importantly, we have our own powers to make laws independent of those on the mainland. So as members of this council, shouldn't we consider what bill is best for Hong Kong? We shouldn't, instead, should we just consider what's said in the cooperation arrangements and then we ignore all other considerations? Let's consider all the amendments. Now, I and the Civic Party would support all amendments moved by the Pan-Democratic camp. Before amendments ruled out by the President, we need to consider their logic. Is it the case that they are entirely logically flawed. That's why they won't fit into the bill. Some members have proposed to move amendments to Clause 2 to change some of the definitions. Now, mainland authorities, this definition moved by Mr. Ray Chen is allowed because it's for consistency. But then Ms. Tanya Chen wants to add definitions on mainland organizations, mainland personnel, but that amendment is not allowed. Now, in accordance with the cooperation arrangement, we're told that we need to follow it to the letter. So the president is saying that for any wordings that are in the cooperation arrangement, then he'll allow such definitions. But if these wordings are not in the cooperation arrangement, he won't allow it. There's another example. Some has proposed sunset clause for the date of lapsing of the bill. Mr. Eddie Chu proposes 2021. Mr. Chu Hoi-dick, Eddie Chu and Mr. Ray Chen have also proposed other dates. But the president say that these would not change the title of the bill. That's why he allows it. Of course, we welcome that. And of course, we also support these amendments. But there is a identical sunset clause that the bill will lapse in 2047. Moved by Ms. Tanya Chen. Somehow this amendment is not allowed. So as long as it's not in line with the cooperation arrangement, then amendments won't be allowed, put simply. But this is actually the amendment we would like to support the most because it's the most reasonable. Not only because it's just moved by the Civic Party. It's about emphasizing the principle of one country, two systems. And this amendment is ruled out. I think it's great pity. Because the cooperation arrangement is not the basic law, is not a superior document. Now, within the framework of the basic law, we are not making the cooperation arrangement within the framework of the basic law. Is not the interpretation of the MPCSC is not an amendment of the basic law, and it's not Annex 3 of the basic law. So what sort of status does the cooperation arrangement have? What in future the courts have to consider the cooperation arrangement? What exactly is the status? Because this is not an MPC interpretation, is not a basic law amendment, is not in Annex 3, definitely it's not part of the Chinese Constitution. So what exactly is it? On this point, Madam Chair, we don't see the basis at all. But unfortunately, the cooperation arrangement, in the mind of the president, has superior status, and that's ridiculous. Dr. Fernando proposes that in Clause 2, the definition of the cooperation arrangement be deleted. Of course, the president will not allow it, because this is the ultimate and unreserved challenge to the president's ruling. So, according to the president's ruling, it says that the purpose is stated clearly in the long title of the bill. But if we refer to the long title of the bill, there's actually no mention of the cooperation arrangement at all. So the president is making arbitrary interpretation. He's even speculating on the purpose of the bill. So the president is not exercising any self-discipline, and it's disappointing. Now, I wanted to move to amendments, new Clause 5A. So apart from the MPA, all regulations, laws will not apply to any other parts of Hong Kong. The president believes that's not in line with the cooperation arrangement. Actually, I do not know why this is not the case. So does the cooperation arrangement mean that the co-location will also apply to other parts of Hong Kong? I'm not being an alarmist, but I really question whether the president's logic is all flawed. Now, if he personally thinks that some amendments are acceptable, and he will say they are in line with the cooperation arrangement. If not, then he won't allow it. Please take your seat. Mr. Paul Chair, what is your point of order? I've been listening with great patience to Mr. Alvin Yeung's speech. But it seems that the greater part of his speech is really on to debate the president's ruling. So that's not in line with our understanding of the rules of procedure. I'm sure Mr. Alvin Young is well aware of it, but maybe he has his reasons. I just want to remind him about that. Thank you. Mr. Alvin Young, yes, in your 9 minutes of speech or so, you've been talking about the amendments, including both those approved or not approved by the President. So please come back to your own approved amendments, please. Mr. Paul Chair, Madam Deputy, is indeed one of the most patient members in this chamber. He always points out in the middle of a member's speech where a member is not acting in accordance with the rules of procedure, and I must thank him for that. But so I ask him to continue to stay patient, and he will know exactly where I'm getting.
Madam Deputy, Mr. Alvin Young, just a reminder that I exercise my discretion to allow you to comment on the President's ruling. You spent 9 minutes on this. I urge you to speak to the amendments. Thank you very much, Madam, for your reminder. As LegCo, we are dealing with the amendments, and we're dealing with this bill. We have to ascertain the purpose of the bill. I'm citing some examples to show that in the course of scrutiny of the bill, what difficulties we faced and what problems we're facing now. I'm citing examples. I cannot cite any examples in vacuum. I think the most effective way to generate discussion is to present the facts to members for consideration. I don't have an intention of challenging the final decision of the President because this is not for debate. I don't think that I am trying to criticize the President's ruling, because even criticizing this would not help matters. I think everything is, the writing is on the wall. Madam Deputy, the whole series of amendments that we're dealing with are intended to make the bill to turn the bill into a bill that is protected by the legal backing. Of course, this is not in line with our ideals, but these amendments are amendments put forward in a possible way. What we are concerned about is that if you don't even have these mechanisms built into the bill, say, for instance, Dr. KWOK expressed concerns about the international governance that cannot be implemented in the MPA, then what will this leave? The one country, two systems. What are we leaving for the next generation? Madam Deputy, the President, of course not you, but you are exercising the power. What has been ruled out of order are the precious elements that we like to preserve in the interest of one country, two systems. So that's why in the 9 minutes before I was interrupted, I tried to highlight all of these. Madam Deputy, not all amendments will be approved. In this bill, definitely it would be passed into law with a big margin. But what we are concerned about is that one country, two systems will not stand in Hong Kong. And the President's rulings will have a bearing on our efforts to protect and safeguard one country, two systems. As I said, the President's rulings are not for debate, but still, do we have any room to mull over his decisions? For example, 70% of the CSAs are ruled out of order. Is there any room for us to mull over the issue and consider the issue? This is something that is of concern. Madam Deputy, what we have to do now, under the three branches of government, we have to do our job in scrutinizing the bill, and we can move, there should be room for us to move CSAs, and this room should be there for us to consider whether the bill is in line with the cooperation arrangement and whether the cooperation arrangement enjoys any particular status. But unfortunately, under the cooperation arrangement, our room is limited. We're completely tied. We cannot have any open discussion. But this is filling us with misgivings and concerns. I hope in the remainder of the meeting, members would exercise their forbearance and listen to what we have to say and consider whether these CSAs are undesirable. In particular, the sunset clause that was proposed by some members, and this would stand us in good stead. And I hope that Madam Deputy and other members would listen with attention. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Madam Deputy, first of all, I'd like to ask the President Andrew Leung, as Speaker of the Council, he is also a non-executive director of a company. Does his company have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest? We never asked him. I think he has to exercise some due diligence. Has he done so? If he hasn't, can he do so? Will he do so? And explain and tell members that as NED of a company, whether his company, maybe the company has dozens of subsidiaries, whether any of these subsidiaries have any commercial deals with the WKS. In any advanced assemblies, the speaker is collecting a lot of money, and I can't see how he can become the non-executive director of a number of companies. You don't have this capacity to. By Mr. Leung or President Leung's declaration, if you have any question, there is a mechanism. Well, declaration is the first layer. The second layer is he is presiding over this co-location bill. Does he have any pecuniary interest, direct or indirect? If it does, then he cannot preside over the meeting. Declaration is the first layer of business. And in presiding over the bill, he should have a look at his interests and see whether there is any pecuniary interests involved. So please ask the President whether he has done so regarding WKS. His company, does it have any business dealings with the WKS? Mr. Leung, sorry I have to interrupt you here. I hope you understand that this is a debate on the CSAs, and every member, including the President, has under the LP examine whether there is a need for declaration. Please come back to the subject. I am coming back to the subject, and this is just a reminder served upon the President. Madam Deputy, you can have your judgment. I've spent my time making this point. I think it's only fair because there is potential conflict of interest. There are 24 amendments. I hope that I would be able to comment on all of them one by one. I'd like to talk about the CSAs because with regard to this co-location bill, the major area of concern is that this bill is out of keeping with the basic law, although there are pro-establishment members that, look, the NPCSC has already taken the decision to say that the cooperation arrangement is in line with the national constitution and the basic law. The NPCSC is the highest organ in the mainland of China. Other than looking at the constitutional function of the body, we have to look at the justification involved. Many legal experts have looked at this. The NPCSC's decision, what is the constitutional status? What are the justifications or the lack thereof? So with regard to this co-location bill, there can be a lot of alternative ways to set the public mind at ease, but the government hasn't selected these. The government talked about the three-step process, whatever step process. It doesn't really matter what legal backing do you have. The NPCSC has attempted interpretation and whatever, but they haven't attempted to resort to this established process, and then came up with the three-step process. I don't support the bill, but with regard to the CSAs, I think I have to express my comments on them. These CSAs, the ultimate objective is to minimize the impact that this bill will have on the basic law. It will seek to minimize the uncertainties involved. But the key thing about this bill is CSAs moved by Dr. KWOK, Cap 383, in Section 3, another section be added to avoid any doubts. The Bill of Rights, Cap 382, should be maintained in the MPA. Now, my position in supporting this CSA is that in 28th of December 2017, the NPCSC endorsed the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Expressway rail link for location bill, and they said that with the MPA set up there, it will not affect the administrative boundary. It will not affect the high degree of autonomy. It will not undermine the power, the rights and freedoms enjoyed by the people of Hong Kong. I'm making the assume that all these words are true. If the CSA were to be carried, then the BOR will bind the mainland officials in MPA. There seem to be some contradictions, but this is justified. BL 22 provides that if there is a need for departments to be set up in Hong Kong, they must obtain the consent of the government of the region. Now, when the government explained why this is not BL 22 suspect, they said that once this bill is enacted, it will be a Hong Kong legislation. It means that the mainland officials under this bill don't have to observe Hong Kong law. Now, this is in accordance with the Hong Kong law, not to observe Hong Kong law. Now, the Hong Kong law exempts them from observing the laws of Hong Kong. In fact, they are observing the Hong Kong law. In a sense, all mainland officials are observing Hong Kong laws. Under the Joint Declaration, Annex 1, Part 13 provides that the Hong Kong, the HK, the ICSCR and ICCPR, these two covenants will be applied to Hong Kong. That this provision will continue and remain in force. BL 39 provides that ICCPR and ICSCR and the international labor law as applied to Hong Kong will continue to be enforced. And through the laws of Hong Kong, they shall be implemented. The rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong residents shall not be restricted unless as prescribed by law. Such restrictions shall not contravene the provisions of the preceding paragraph of this article. That is Hong Kong being part of China. Dr. KWOK's CSA precisely tries to show Article 3922 and also the 28th of December 2017 NPCSC's decision regarding high degree of autonomy and the freedom and rights will not be undermined, and mainland officials shall fulfill the obligations under the international covenants. And for Hong Kong people who entered the MPA and any visitors in the MPA, and there is some clear high degree of protection. Under the BOR, there are many provisions offering protection. Regarding mainland enforcement issues, I can cite a number of examples, and Madam Deputy 5.1 provides that everybody enjoys freedom of movement and personal safety. Nobody can be detained or arrested arbitrarily, and nobody's rights and freedom should be deprived of. Madam Deputy, you have commented on the incidents involving Hong Kong reporters being assaulted in the mainland. Once we moved into the MPA, would there be any scenarios where some unidentified people may harass Hong Kong people? The BOR in the MPA, if it is enforceable, then the officers will have to abide by the Bill of Rights. I think it would be good for anybody using the MPA, whether they are from Hong Kong or from the mainland, or whether they are from international communities, going to be offering a good level of protection. And this will assuage our concerns about using the facilities, and the tourism sector will experience some booming trade.
Looking at other useful safeguards, for example, Section 5 and 4, anyone would be deprived of freedom and under arrest and custody, they can apply for a court trial to decide whether their custody is illegal. If illegal, they should be released immediately. The personal safety and freedom will be protected. If it's illegal custody, the court has the right to decide whether it is legal or not. And for 8.4, it's stipulated that anyone with a Hong Kong residency should not have their rights stripped away. Another provision mentions that everyone would have the right, would have their views uninterfered. For the Hong Kong residents, if they entered MPA and said something that may antagonize the central government, they will still be protected. Once you cross into the MPA, since being close to Hong Kong, you may feel like being in Hong Kong, so you would freely expressed opinions. For example, Commissar criticized the central government for such mistakes. If they lack the basic legal protection, how can the Hong Kong people could enter the MPA in confidence to take the HCRL? And for Bill of Rights, Section 27 is quite important. And I mentioned that the right of a peaceful assembly and should be confirmed. A lot of the pan-democrats have asked the government, in case of labor disputes, in the bill, there is some area, especially where the employment matters. The employment ordinance does not apply mainland laws. In the context of employment relations, and some service provider in Hong Kong, let's say a cleaner or a repair or maintenance contractor, or engage in some dispute or some light confrontation with the employer, and stop work in the MPA or even conduct a strike. Does that mean we have to hold them in custody according to mainland criminal laws, or apply Hong Kong laws on labor relations? That's not clear. If the Hong Kong Bill of Rights can be enforced in the MPA, the right to peaceful assembly will be ensured. Besides required by law, and public peace and public order, and maintain public hygiene, and safeguarding the freedom of others. So if the right to peaceful assembly will affect public order or public peace, thus will not be protected, that is a very reasonable protection that the assembly must be conducted peacefully. If some of the workers in their fight for rights conduct assemblies in the MPA, very peaceful ones, they would be protected under this amendment. So for Dr. KWOK to move this amendment is definitely worthy of support. If the BOR can be applied in the MPA for the mainland authorities personnel, they would need to detain some passengers, Hong Kong residents included, due to some reason. They must apply to the court first, and the person in custody can also apply habeas corpus from the court. Under normal circumstances, of course, I don't see this to be invoked frequently. Under exceptional circumstances, we should offer exceptional protection. This amendment is among the 25th Amendment. Is one of the key ones. The President had wisely allowed this to be tabled because it's within the scope of the cooperation agreement and its direction. I hope that our colleagues will support this amendment and other 23 amendments. Madam Deputy, I so submit. Mr. Lau Kok-fan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. The opposition camps have proposed 75 amendments and announced in advance for a filibuster. If not that the President had drawn a line and approved only 24 amendments with a total of 36 hours of debate time, I believe the filibuster would go on indefinitely. In fact, this debate on collocation debate has been last for so long. Back in the 2012 budget debate, there have been an exhaustive discussion, and this time the Bills Committee has spent 17 meetings to a total of 45 hours to debate, and the public has a certain understanding of this bill. A collocation arrangement had obtained support from the majority of the public, whether according to the DAB survey or the opinion surveys done by different organizations, show that the majority of the general public support the collocation arrangements. Now the opposition is a name she's looking at the amendments. These are rather frivolous in nature. For example, changing the color to signify the Chi-chuen stablings. And some that are rather political grandstanding, claimed, for example, proposed to be one of arrangements or question that the collocation arrangement is a violation of the basic law. And the MPCAP's decision and the one-off provision is also ridiculous. And for LegCo members, anything is to benefit Hong Kong and benefit the public, we should pass. Of this 36 hours of debate, so looking at the situation now and last week, it's not sufficient for the opposition to conduct filibuster. Even if we let them debate at 360 hours, they will still continue filibuster. And somebody have talked to the media way early. Even though we couldn't stop the passage of the bill in LegCo, there was do the utmost to delay the passage of the bill in order to garner support. Looking at a strategy to procrastinate, we just to buy more time for the supporters to make preparations to wage another wave for opposition. This is not a debate of substance, simply looking at the political stance instead of the facts. So at the trial runs of the high-speed rail, then some incidents happening. For example, the water seepage and the trains going slightly from the rails and also affect the public perception. Fundamentally or logically, the engineering issues it's two different things from the immigration and arrangements. So one time we'll talk about work qualities and the correlation arrangement. On one hand, we'll be ask for enhanced safety. However, the clearance collocation is not in conflict. So we're talking about the CIQ and collocation, and the opposition tend to equate these engineering issues with the collocation arrangements and even demonize XRL. For this is simply obscuring of facts and confuse the two. In the face of these issues, the administration should identify the costs and come clean so that before the commissioning of XRL, it should ensure the safe and smooth running of the XRL to inspire public confidence in the rail. There's still some time before the commissioning of the XRL, so the problems can be identified. I see that as a good thing, so that during the trial run phase, we can identify issues to offer rectification to ensure that the XRL will be running smoothly upon commissioning. Safety is the top concern, and the convenience is also an area of concern. So we have to be concerned about the safety. We'll also be concerned about the convenience. The collocation is exactly ensure that the commissioning XRL can play its role to connect the Hong Kong section to the national high-speed rail network. I will not take up too much time, because most of the amendments are quite frivolous. Now that we expect the XRL will be commissioned in the fourth quarter, and a collocation arrangement is the prerequisite for the providing convenience to the high-speed rail. On some of the above, I support the bill and object to the other amendments. Mr. Holden Chow. And Madam Deputy, I heard Mr. Albunyang accuse the President of permitting the large amount of amendments and claim that the amendments as being unreasonable. This is simply misleading the public, as if that he claims that having a criminal record will make your life more enriched. So the amendments is simply an indirect way in the name of amendments to try to filibuster the passage of the bill. We didn't stop them from abusing such procedures that will couldn't hold accountable to the public. Most of the amendments tabled by the amendments of the basis of claims that it's contravene the basic law, and it all claims that the current collocation proposal contravene the basic law. While levying such accusations, when has the LegCo become a court and conduct and make it really before a trial? Mr. Porche had a point. If you feel there's anything wrong legally, you could just challenge it in the courts and let the judges to decide. Instead of turning LegCo into a stage to conduct a trial while levying accusations and claiming that the bill and the collocation arrangement violates the basic law. So speaking on the substance of the amendment, I will spend more time to refute them. The amendments claim that they will need to incorporate a sunset clause for an expiration date. That's utterly ridiculous. As we all know that the collocation of the XRL how to come before that we entered an agreement, cooperation arrangement with the mainland authorities, which led to the sequence of procedures. And now you unilaterally declare that to add an expiration date in the cooperation arrangement. It's like that both sides enter a contract. Upon signing the contract, on one side claims that when they add an extra clause and after stop expire at a certain date, and you have to accept it. So when they become our honorable opposition lawmakers claim to respect the law, but on the other hand, disregard the law, as some of them actually have legal background. I found that rather baffling. However, the opposition camp have always hold double standards. Another issue, and even for Mr. Dennis Kwok amendment, when Ms. Stronger need to refute that, I must criticize that. He claims that for the preamble have to add that the cooperation arrangement and the MPCC decision does not form part of the Hong Kong law. So are we achieving the effect that you're stipulating in the provisions that this cooperation arrangement the other side in the past have no legal standing? That means that for the agreement and entered and conduct local legislation, and there were only promulgated that the agreement entered has no legal standing. This is not child's play. If we pass this amendment, I think Hong Kong could as well head for destruction.
Madam Deputy, I would like to take this opportunity to refute briefly the large number of amendments moved by the opposition camp that have not been allowed because they are grossly misleading to the public. And if we don't explain that clearly in front of the TV, they will think that all their amendments would help to make the co-location work properly. But that's all a lie, so I submit. Mr. Chi-chuen. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Great that I'm speaking after Mr. Holden Chow, because my speech is exactly on what he called the ridiculous sunset clause. There's an amendment to propose to add a new clause that this bill will expire on 2023. So I'm speaking in support of Dr. Fernando Zhang's amendment to include a sunset clause, but is it totally ridiculous? Well, speak slowly so you can all hear me clearly. Whether this is some sort of a ploy. Why do we want a sunset clause for the co-location bill? Because the co-location arrangement should not be eternal. And so therefore the co-location bill should not be in effect permanently. Now, Rimsky-Yuen, the then Secretary for Justice, said last July, for the MPA area, it will be leased to the relevant mainland departments for use. There won't be any transfer of ownership. And then in the C's question-answer session, C's question time in January, Carrie Lam said that although all land in Hong Kong belongs to the CPG, but we have the right to manage sites, so that's why we therefore set up the MPA for co-location. This is the legal basis for doing so in accordance with the MPCSC decision. So Hong Kong therefore has total jurisdiction over the territory. And that's why they just leasing out the site to the mainland authorities just to avoid it being unconstitutional. Now, the government has never provided the lease. There's no leased term, the sum involved, and so on. So far, there's not been a decision on it. So we have reasons to believe that the arrangement is for Hong Kong to lose its jurisdiction at the MPA permanently, and that may be against Article 7 of the Basic Law. That is, The land and natural resources within the Hong Kong South shall be state property. The government of Hong Kong SAR shall be responsible for the management, use, and development, and for the lease or grant to individuals, legal persons, or organizations for use or development. The revenues derived therefrom shall be exclusively at the disposal of the government of the region. Now, Hong Kong is losing out its jurisdictions over the MPA area. So it's more than just about leasing out the area. Of course, that's against the basic law. I can just give you a simple example. Let's say the liaison's office or the PLA still uses land in Hong Kong, but there's still land in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong laws instead of mainland laws apply. In accordance with Article 22(3) of the Basic Law, so these mainland personnel stationed in Hong Kong must still comply with the laws of Hong Kong. So it's totally different an arrangement for the MPA now. The current arrangement is against the basic law, of course. Then we need to set expiration date for such an arrangement. So we need a sunset clause, because there is this non-existent lease. We want this MPA to remain forever, as it's against the basic law, and also it will allow the legislature to conduct a timely review to see whether there is still a need for the co-location arrangement in future. The government said that the co-location arrangement is modeled on the Shenzhen Bay Hong Kong Port area, Bayport Hong Kong Port area. But then for the Shenzhen Bay Port Hong Kong Port area, there is a sunset clause. So in accordance with the Shenzhen Bay area, Shenzhen Bay Port Hong Kong Port area, the ordinance, there is a section that says that the ordinance will lapse at midnight on the 30th of June 2047. So this is for the right to use the land, that is the expiry date, and if the right to use land is to expire earlier, that there should be a notice gazetted for that purpose. At the time, Ms. Emily Lau and Mrs. Miriam Lau of the Liberal Party have asked at the Bills Committee meeting to add a clause. So the valid date of the ordinance will be aligned with that of the expiry date of the lease. This is to avoid any embarrassment. And towards the deadline of the bill, that it may be necessary to submit another bill to address problems identified. That's what the government said then. So you can see, therefore, the government was a lot more sensitive in handling the matter, and it's also much more above board. Now, for various reasons, there may be a need to enter the bill, the ordinance, or the lease earlier, and they also recognize the need for reviewing various arrangements if problems arise. So the co-location bill is an equally important ordinance. How come there is not such sunset clause? And also for the Shenzhen Bay Port Area Hong Kong, Shenzhen Bay Port Hong Kong Port Area Ordinance, it states that the Shenzhen government, the Guangdong provincial government, and Hong Kong SL government have signed a lease for the site. So therefore, the site is granted to Hong Kong under a lease. How come for the co-location arrangement at West Kowloon Station, how come it can't be handled the same way? So this is concrete evidence that is ceding of land. So don't keep asking how come we can have co-location at Shenzhen Bay Port area, how come not at the West Kowloon Station? It's the case that we can only do co-location on mainland sites but not in Hong Kong. Well, let's not talk about that, because from the way this is handled differently, we know that the Shenzhen Bay area is not the same as the West Kowloon Station. While Frank Chen is the new secretary, I'm a new member here. Maybe he doesn't know very well the operations of the previous governments. He he actually sees that clause not as a sunset clause for the Shenzhen Bay port, rather is an arrangement for renewing the lease. What Mr. Frank Chan said is entirely different from what the previous government officials said. Now, actually, there could be a report made to the Central People's Government to terminate the land use prematurely. And so that another bill could be submitted to deal with any problems identified. So that sunset clause definitely not to facilitate renewal arrangement, but rather is to facilitate contingency arrangements should problems arise. So that's the that's the whole process for enacting the Shenzhen Bay Port Hong Kong Port Area Ordinance. I would suggest Mr. Frank Chan to learn more about the process. At the time, Mrs. Miriam Lau proposed a sunset clause. Perhaps the Liberal Party could ask her why she proposed that. The Liberal Party shouldn't go back on this position now. Another reason for refusing the sunset clause is even more laughable. That is, the SL government needs to discuss with the mainland on the on the arrangement to use the land on Shenzhen, so the arrangement is different. Now, how come you have not even discussed how to use the site, and then you come up with this statement? The Hong Kong SL government is now discussing the relevant matter with mainland authorities, and the government said that they will report to members in due course. By then, the Bills Committee has been dissolved, the bill has been passed, so what is the point of reporting to LegCo? Or I can make it official if I want, but of course you're already an official. So that's exactly why I believe we need a sunset clause. So the LegCo will be able to initiate changes to the arrangement. Now, the SL government should have regard to the actual case circumstances and move another and submit another bill upon the expiry of this bill, and then the LegCo could consider whether to pass the bill. But what the government is doing now is to put LegCo in a passive position. So if the government doesn't propose any amendments to the bill, then there's no way we can amend any arrangement, so you're sidelining us. I don't know why the loyalists are so scared of this sunset clause. If everything goes swimmingly with the co-location arrangement, there are no controversies, definitely after 5 years, we could allow the bill to continue, and there won't be any impact on the co-location arrangement. Now, you're against the sunset clause is because you are scared. You know that after 5 years, there will be serious problems with the co-location arrangement, and then the public may demand the termination of the co-location arrangement. Perhaps the loyalists would not have enough votes to amend the sunset clause, and so they will be stuck. But if the loyalists are so confident in the co-location arrangement, then they should vote in support of Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's amendment. So 5 years later, the loyalists could again explain to the democratic camp that the co-location arrangement is so great. That will give you a chance to do so when we consider the bill again. So this analysis is just totally ridiculous, as claimed by Mr. Howen Chow. So are we just filibustering and using this amendment as a disguise? Or have we done much research and considered many arrangements, and so now that's why we're supporting the sunset clause? Now, if the loyalist camps are not scared, then 5 years later, you can tell us loud and clear that co-location arrangement is absolutely great. Why won't you do that? So I speak in support of Dr. Fernando Cheung's amendment. Mr. Christopher Cheung. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the XRL collocation bill. I'm strongly against the 24 amendments moved by the pan-democratic camp. I support the collocation bill because it will give the biggest economic benefits to the operation of the XRL. I and the financial sector that I represent have no reservation in supporting the collocation bill. I'm against the 24 amendments because those amendments are totally unfounded. They won't improve the bill, but rather they would undermine the purpose of the bill. So that's why I definitely will not support such amendments with ill intentions. I think for any members of the public who are objective and rational, they will not oppose the collocation bill. We all know it is essential to implement collocation at the WKS. Otherwise, the XR could not realize its full potential. And we need to have collocation at the WKS. That means we must first enact local legislation. So the collocation bill has only 4 parts and 8 clauses in total, but the preamble of the bill states the background to the bill.
The Clause 1 provides for the commencement date. Clauses 4 and 5 provide for the scope of the MPA. Clause 6 provides for the jurisdiction of the MPA. And clauses 8, 7, and 8 provide for savings provision and interpretation of future documents. The bill has clearly set out where, when, how about the collocation. It does provide legal backing for the collocation arrangement. I am mystified why the opposition members raise objection to the bill, other than opposing for the sake of opposition. I object to the CSAs. First of all, I'd like to say something about CSA number 11. The CSAs are unjustified and absurd. Ms. Claudia and Mr. Raymond Chan propose that the commencement date should be the 300th and 365th day after the ordinance is passed. Now, these are absurd and unjustified. As we all know, the XIL was voted in the 1990s, and now it is close to being commissioned. There was a passage of about more than a decade, and there were a lot of setbacks in the process. We hope that this will be coming into operation in September this year, but Ms. Claudia and Mr. Ray Chan are trying to make the public wait for another 300 days. And this is depriving people of the chance of benefiting from the high-quality service. And they are taking away the enjoyment of the public. I don't think I can support these. Ms. Claudia mentioned the scandals besetting the MTRC. I think to implement a co-location arrangement, we do need a lot more time for preparation. Undoubtedly, the MTRC has been performing dismally recently. The government has set up a commission of inquiry. I don't think Ms. Claudia will save her nonsense. and not do anything that will not help matters. I don't think they should be stalling the progress of the XRL. President, we are mystified about the proposal of a sunset clause. We don't understand why there has to be such a clause. What purpose does it serve? I heard what Mr. Chu said at the penny drop there, and Mr. Chu said that the co-location bill is a draconian bill, and therefore the sooner it expires, the better. I think Mr. Chu's speech exposes the fact that the opposition members are deciding on whether they support the bill on their whim. They're not looking at the legal backing. They would go to all length to pull the plug on the bill. Even if the bill is passed, they would move all manner of amendments in order to bring an end to this piece of legislation. And members should be fair and just, and are they acting in a way that is expected of a legislative member? Are they acting in a rational way that is expected of a legislative member? President, what is equally absurd is the CSA moved by Mr. Ray Chan. He proposes that there should be offences for the mainland officials stationed in MPA. I find that they support the CSAs for one reason, and that is they don't have any faith, and they are being hostile to the mainland officials in the MPA, and therefore they are introducing these offences regarding the MPA officials, and they are making the offence of 30 years of custodial sentence and $10 million in fine. I find this wholly absurd. The co-location bill provides that the MPA is an area where the mainland law shall apply. If mainland MPA officials were to contravene certain legal provisions, they would be dealt with in accordance with mainland laws. If they enter into Hong Kong area and commit offences, there would be sufficient legal provisions to deal with them. Mr. Ray Chan proposes that there should be an offence clause for the mainland officials and MPA. I think this is superfluous. I mean, these unreasonable moves is a race to the bottom. I'm not going to comment on these CSAs blow by blow, except to say that I'll be voting against them. President, Mr. Pt2 mentioned traitors in his speech, and I hope that the opposition members will face reality when implementing these co-location arrangement. We are trying to be beneficial to the economy. I hope that you will not be traitors. You will not be alienating the members of the public. And I hope that you would have the public opinions uppermost in your mind. And I urge you to endorse the co-location bill. With these words, I conclude my speech. Members, we're going to be here till 9 p.m. This evening. Mr. James Toh, President. We are making these provisions stand part of the bill. I agree with Mr. Ray Chan that we ought to talk about them in their entirety. And there are issues of principles. It's not a question of second reading or not. If these provisions to some members are against the basic law, and if they do not move any CSAs, or if they do not propose any CSAs rejected by the President, then these provisions cannot stand part of the bill. And if this goes through the third reading, they will become the part of the legal foundation. And from the point of view of some of the Pendam members, they are inconsistent with the basic law, and therefore I feel that all these arguments can be advanced at this point in time. Chairman, the collocation bill, in the context of this bill, to be blunt, I'm trying to make it simple for the benefit of the members of the public. There is a lot of audience tuning in. The government proposes that there is an area in Hong Kong where Hong Kong law will not apply. And this is a piece of land in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong law will disapply and mainland law will apply. This is easier to understand. Since time immemorial, since the basic law was drafted many years ago, they were telling the whole world that in Hong Kong law shall apply. Of course, mainland law will apply in the mainland. For laws in the mainland, they will be applicable to Hong Kong. They will be listed in Annex 3, the Foreign Affairs and Defense, the national flags, national emblems, and so on. Anything other than Annex 3, and they are creating a place that doesn't belong in Hong Kong. In the law, in the bill, it says that this will be leased. And there is a table, and there is this annex, this schedule here. The land will be leased, and there will be an agreement with the mainland whereby the place will lie outside of Hong Kong, but it will lie within the mainland of China, and when mainland law will apply. In Hong Kong, we are enacting this piece of bill to disapply Hong Kong law in the area. The problem is twofold. First, the piece of land is leased to the mainland authorities. At the Bills Committee, I did put a question. This is about the details, the nitty-gritty of the bill. I put the question to the administration. Can Hong Kong, through this bill, specify that this piece of land which is leased to the mainland, where Hong Kong laws will disapply, can we say through this particular bill, can we specify the kind of mainland laws that will apply in the MPA? There is a paradox there. If we say that the Hong Kong laws will not apply, if we say the mainland laws will apply, then it would mean the whole body of mainland laws. That this is plain reading. If you disapply Hong Kong law, then mainland laws will apply, and the whole body of mainland laws will apply. But it would give rise to a weird situation. If there are changes to the mainland laws, do we have to amend this piece of legislation? You may say that there is no need to do so because we say that mainland laws will apply to this area. We mean the prevailing laws of the mainland, but it doesn't say here. If we can specify by implication that we're applying the prevailing mainland laws, why can't we say that through Hong Kong law, we can specify what sort of mainland laws will be applicable. I think this is feasible. I remember at the Bills Committee I put a very technical question, and at that time I think it was the Secretary for Transport and Housing. He had a word with the DOJ colleague. I think it was the law officer. They conversed among themselves for a while, and then he said that naturally mainland laws will be applicable. There is no question of Hong Kong being in a position to specify the kind of mainland laws. I hope I remember right, but I remember that this must be the case. I know that the President ruled out of order. I meant to submit this CSA. The CIQ was rejected by the President. What if we just apply the CIQ laws of the mainland instead of the whole body of laws? I wonder why the President ruled this out of order. I'm not going to belabor this point, but this is a very complicated issue. There is an agreement with the mainland. It doesn't say what laws will apply. I did also ask a question of the Secretary. With this framework of the bill, can we say that the mainland can take a decision in future what laws will apply, or only CIQ, customs, immigration, and what is it, customs and quarantine? Yes, thank you very much. Will apply.
He didn't reply specifically. I claimed the arrangement is there. I don't think this is the end of this matter, even if the bill is passed. If the Hong Kong public thinks, or even the mainland authorities, maybe for some reason, or for a reason unknown, well, let's say I recently wrote an article that ran on a newspaper. I plan to say during the second reading. I already made the speech at the German debate while the Secretary listened. I claimed that it would undermine the one country, two system and the China's image, as well as the other nation's perception. If the mainland decided for some reason to limit which mainland laws to apply, that would be important. However, legally, is that we couldn't, by way of this bill, to stipulate that only the CIQ laws would apply. I think it should be feasible. The administration might respond that, just like some other colleagues said, once you signed into the arrangement, since the arrangement is set out in the provisions, the government will not have the courage to deviate from the arrangement. Must the arrangement allow for the wholesale applicability of mainland laws? The administration had never given a clear reply, or even reply if that's the meaning. And on the Dennis Kwok amendment on Annex 6, that to avoid doubt, the documents mentioned in the preamble does not fall a part of the basic law or the law of Hong Kong. I think that's the most substantive amendment. If the pro-establishment camp is of the view that other than Annex 3 of the basic law, if a part of Hong Kong does not apply Hong Kong law and where the mainland law will apply, if the administration and the pro-establishment camp is confident that through LegCo that this would not contravene the basic law, you should agree to adopt Dennis Kwok Amendment because you're confident that it would run against the basic law. The question is that if the documents referred to in the preamble, for example, the arrangement as well as the NPC's decision, I just put it in layman's language. If so, the provisions passed by LegCo will not have sufficient clout. The court will decide it violates the basic law, because the LegCo the basic law does not authorize the basic law to have a place in Hong Kong. Does not exercise Hong Kong law but apply the mainland laws. So it's completely deviate from the legislative and the intent and the principles of the basic law. So we have to have a Hong Kong LegCo to rubber stamp the MBCAC decision, so it become part of the Hong Kong law. That would give it sufficient legal clout. So that's a rather tricky argument. If for the MPCA decision, they wouldn't care whether the LegCo would stamp it or not. Is actually on a subordinate relationship. If you agree to this, you can agree to Dennis Kwok's amendment as well. Since it's not part of the Hong Kong law, so they have the legal basis, because since the MBC's decision would have the sufficient legal standing. Remember Dr. Priscilla Leung, the Bills Committee report, which with the Regina Yip as chairman, and Dr. Priscilla Leung wrote a letter to Regina Yip and raised my point. The MBCSC decision itself is a legal authority. I don't know what's the meaning. According to the Hong Kong laws, societies. So there's only two instrument in the Hong Kong law. So that's the basic law and the amendment to basic law, or interpretation. So these three become the binding powers under Hong Kong law. Besides these three instruments, now you're creating something new called MPC's decision. And this MPC decision would enjoy equal standing as interpretation powers. During the Bills Committee stage, I put my question to Teresa Chang, Secretary of Justice. I'm asking her, is the MPC decision equivalent of the interpretation? She said no, because decision and interpretation are two different things. She wouldn't claim that these two are the same, because the mainly constitutional expert will not share the same view. A lot of colleagues have raised this question as well. They thank them for asking questions repeatedly. Does this mean that they were legally binding? That's a ready or true question for the pro-establishment members, and they would say that they will be the same. The embassy decision would have a standing. The administration claims that it's only a legal standing. However, would that as binding as the interpretation? They never give an answer to that. Why his non-answer is important in this case? If the establishment is that confident that the embassy decision will be used by the Court of Final Appeal to explain whether the whole arrangement is constitutional or not, our court will decide that the embassy decision would have the equivalent of interpretation and clause under the basic law framework. Then you will not oppose the Dennis Kwok Amendment. Instead, you should rely on the Hong Kong legislature to put a rubber stamp on it. Mr. Ray Chan. I will continue to speak on the new clause 9 or 10. So just now, Christopher Cheung object my 2 proposed amendments that I would set a criminal offenses and main authority station and mainland port area personnel, and claims that it would be hostile to these personnel and rather superfluous. In my first speech, I already made that clear. That according to the cooperation arrangement, they never explicitly set out that whether the mainland authorities personnel can enter areas outside the MPA. It only specified that the area outside the MPA, the personnel have no law enforcement powers. That during the Bills Committee stage, when I inquired the government of the legislative intent, and it claims that the MPA stage law enforcement personnel not only cannot enforce the law outside the MPA, they could not enter the area outside the MPA. That's a clear answer. And for this mainland law officers, they could not enter the area outside MPA is not incorporated into our bill. So that's why I've added these 2 clauses as to supplement the main body. If the mainland law enforcement officer can freely enter or leave the MPA, that will lead to negative consequences. So for this personnel, I have no idea where they live. They could have taken the XRL to work. They would come to the MPA of the West Kowloon station, and then they could able to go shopping. The area outside the MPA, let's say bring 2 cans of milk formula, took the XRL home. Of course, this shouldn't be allowed. According to the administration's reply, they wouldn't be allowed to do this. And the mainland authorities, how should they interpret the clause of not entering the areas outside the MPA to exercise the law? Well, Secretary claims that the Bills Committee not only did not able to enforce the law outside the MPA, do not enter the areas outside the MPA. Would that be a different understanding? That the mainland personnel, when not enforcing law, they would enter areas outside the MPA. So during local legislation, I hope to have a clear delineation. So to avoid any argument, I wouldn't care what the mainland law enforcement agency thinks. So not only you're not able to enforce the law outside the MPA, you're not able to allow it in areas outside the MPA. So let's say it out from the outset to avoid potential misunderstanding and conflict. So that's my first reason of moving this amendment. So that's why I said we should have debated it separately. That for me to introduce a penalty for the mainland personnel so that they were not able to enter the area outside the MPA, to make it more explicit to avoid disputes. Wasn't that reasonable? Then we should then debate that whether the penalty I propose is too harsh or not. That's why I come up with this that help to include a miscellaneous provision in the bill that any of the persons recognized by the Central People's Government as an officer of the MPA who enters area outside the MPA will commit an offense. So there, of course, there will be penalty. So you claim it's an offense, but what is the criminal liability? We have to consider that when drafting legislation. So there was a chief passed the Article 1 of the 6 of the agreement, so that Article 6 would become one of the main body of the bill, and so that they would have a legal basis for the Hong Kong authorities to enforce the law. Also demonstrate the commitment by the administration that the personnel will not be aged to enter area outside the MPA. Also ascertain the responsibility obligations. In my amendment, besides the personnel, his or herself, anyone that to aid abetting counsel of procuring persons recognized by the central police government as officers to enter area outside the MPA will commit an offense. It means that any government department will not have the authority, or anyone recognized as the Central People's Government as officers, besides discharging official duties to enter Hong Kong. They will ensure that the Hong Kong government would not violate Article 6 of the arrangement, as well as the promise by the administration during the bill committee stage. So now we talk about the penalty. I hope to discuss it layer by layer. I'm not coming up out of thin air. Of course, some would claim it's too harsh and accuse you of being hostile to the mainland law enforcement officers and hoping to hate mongering and not respectful of these mainland officers. Hope that we can, by establishing harsh offense to show in a proportionate way, that if they violate the cooperation arrangement and the collocation ordinance, they will have negative consequences to the public, so that the law enforcement officers will have to face the commensurate consequences, whether for those to enter to an area outside the MPA or those who aid and abet the entering the outside MPA, they will be liable to a fine of $10,000 and imprisonment for 30 years. You might, but that is not a random numbers. I actually have a reference point to that. So it's reference to the immigration ordinance.
Now, for unauthorized persons entering or leaving Hong Kong, or those abetting unauthorized persons, the penalty is $5 million and fine and imprisonment for 14 years. Here, the target is snakeheads. They are not even law enforcement officers, so all their life may be they are always on the wrong side of the law, trying to make a living. But here, this particular amendment is about mainland law enforcement officers who do not observe the law, because in theory these are law enforcement officers. They should take it upon themselves to follow the law, but they know the law and then they breach the law. Then of course then the maximum penalty should be higher than snakeheads, instead of being equivalent to that for snakeheads, because we need to reflect the gravity of the offense. And also the co-location ratio is already putting the basic law under serious threat, and the one country, two systems under serious threat. If mainland law enforcement officers break the law knowingly and they just walk freely to outside the MPA, that will further undermine people's confidence. And the SF government and the CPG will find it harder to implement co-location in other parts of Hong Kong because of lack of public confidence or trust. So that's why such behavior of mainland law enforcement officers would do serious damage. The damage they do is far more serious than that of someone organizing for illegal immigrants to come to Hong Kong. So that's why the penalty must be higher even than the penalty for violating the immigration legislation. And also for any person that aids, abets, counsels, or procures or conspires with another person to aid, abet, counsel, or procure any person recognized by the Central People's Government as an officer of the mainland authority stationed at the mainland port area to enter any area outside the MPA commits an offence is liable on a conviction on the indictment to fine of $10 million and to imprisonment of 30 years. Again, it's to reflect the gravity of the offence. And I didn't make up these wordings. I just copied them from the immigration ordinance. So for people who aids, abets, or counsels others to enter illegally, these are the stickheads. They are not public officers. They are not people with power. But here, in my amendment, the target are mainland officers stationing at the MPA, so they should know the law better than criminals. So for those who could aid or abet them must be someone high up in the hierarchy or those with power or influence. That's why they worked collude together with the mainland law enforcement officers to go against the MPCSC decision, the cooperation arrangement. They would severely undermine people's confidence in one country, two systems. So how can we give them light sentences? Let's say if I don't put $10 billion and imprisonment of 30 years, instead I just go by the immigration ordinance, that is a fine of $5 million or imprisonment of 14 years. Do you think that will be fine? If that's the case, then you could have moved the amendment in future. You could move the amendment in future. You can't move it this time, of course. So as you refute my arguments, you have to get it right. Is it because you think that the penalty I'm proposing is too heavy? Well, because it's just a question of, law public officers who knowingly break the law, so that they should receive heavier penalties. That's all it is. Public officers are always punished more, if they break the law. Because without such heavy penalties, that won't be deterrent effect. Now, some said, if you because sometimes when we say that we complain the penalty is too high, you say, if you're not going to break the law, why are you afraid of heavy penalty? Why are you afraid of the public order ordinance? Why are you afraid of the evil laws as long as you don't break the law? Yes, exactly. It's the same logic. Here we're talking about mainland officers stationed MPA. They're not allowed to go beyond MPA as long as they don't break the law. Then this penalty doesn't affect them. So why complain that my proposed penalty is too heavy? Now, if the pro-establishment camp supports this amendment of mine, then that will show that you are committed to defending the co-location arrangement. You're sending out a clear message to the mainland and to frontline law enforcement officers. Don't think that they can take the XRL to come and work in Hong Kong and then they could take the girlfriend out to go shopping or whatever. Now, we won't allow mainland law enforcement officers to breach the cooperation arrangement and co-location arrangement. Now, some say that maybe this is too strict. Is it the case that under all circumstances they're allowed to leave the MPA and go into the Hong Kong port area? Of course not. Let's say if there's a major disaster, a fire, explosion or terrorist attack. Now, if the mainland law enforcement officers have to cross the red line into the Hong Kong port area, as a result, even if they have breached the law and this particular provision, I'm sure the court will rule in a fair manner. I haven't even come to Clause 11. I hope I will have a chance to speak on it because I don't know how many times I may speak. I'm just saying if there's some wordings are too harsh, like exemption or whatever, then if we allow words like exemption and so on, then the mainland law enforcement officers may interpret these wordings on their own. And even when it's not an emergency, they might still ask to go into the Hong Kong area, so the Hong Kong government won't be able to withstand such pressure. So that's why for any exemption clauses or mention of emergency, I haven't included that. But I'm sure if there should be such cases, our courts will rule in a fair manner. That's why I ask members to support clauses 9 and 10 of my amendments. Ms. Tanya Chen, thank you, Mr. Chairman.